Hey people, it is Saturday, October the 5th. The time is 2:18 p.m. and it's about 15 degrees Celsius here in my hometown of North Bay, Ontario. We're currently looking towards downtown North Bay here from the Main Street overpass. And just over here is a residential neighborhood called the East End. And I used to live in this neighborhood. It's right beside the Ontario Northland Railway Yards and Maintenance Facility here, if I can get my words out. And those train cars you see all covered up in tarps are GO trains. They refurbish GO trains here at the ONTC facility in North Bay. GO Transit, of course, doesn't serve North Bay. It's a bit far for that. But we still see the GO trains here in town for other reasons. So I thought I'd make my way into the old residential neighborhood here and check out the very first house I ever lived in when I first moved to North Bay at age 5. And there's another house in the same neighborhood that I lived in much later. As a matter of fact, it was the last place I lived before I moved to Toronto. So this will take you right into the heart of downtown if you keep following Main Street. There's an off-ramp here that will take us onto McIntyre Street East. Kind of a neat view when you're driving into downtown. This overpass goes over the railway tracks, obviously. And it'll lead you onto Lakeshore Drive going in that direction and the West Ferris part of North Bay. And the East End here is also considered the rough side of town. At least the old part of town anyway. There's the old West End and there's the East End here. And the East End is definitely the rough part of town. The old West End is a more family-oriented, upscale neighborhood. There are lots of families obviously living in the East End also. But the houses are much more modest. And many of the old homes here have been subdivided into apartments and rooming houses. So that will lead you onto another part of McIntyre Street. So we'll go check out my very first house here in North Bay. It's on Whitson Street, the last street before the ONTC maintenance facility and rail yards. I moved there with my mom after my parents split up, because her mom owned the house and there was a rental unit on the second floor that we moved into, my mom and my sister and myself, when I was about 5 years old. And we lived there for several years, maybe a couple of years, because my grandmother sold the house and she moved further north up to Cochrane, Ontario. So my mom didn't want to move up to Cochrane, so she stayed in North Bay and we moved to a different apartment after that. And my grandfather worked here at the ONTC, so he was just a stone's throw away from work. But he passed away by the time I moved to North Bay and moved into the house with my grandmother. Or at least in the unit above where she lived. So I have lots of memories of this part of the street in particular, because there was a corner store up that way that I would often walk to. I'm not sure if the neighborhood was considered a rough neighborhood back then, but over the years it did start to develop that reputation. Certainly by the 1980s and 90s. It was the mid-70s when I moved here. And I just remember tons of kids being around. And I got into all sorts of adventures, or misadventures, I should say. So I haven't walked over here to look at this house in a very long time. Not during my last couple of visits to North Bay anyway. So there's the Ontario Northland yards over there. The shops, as they call them. And this used to be a corner store here called Reese's, which was just across the street. But sometimes I would opt to go to the other store for some reason or other. I can see Reese's fine printing is still here. That's the same Reese, no doubt. Looks like Reese's is now an apartment. I would often run across the street to go to that store with my 50 cents or whatever, thinking I could load up on candy or snacks, chips, pop, all that sort of stuff. And this is it. This is the house where I first lived. So the main floor was where my grandmother lived. And up above was our apartment unit where I lived with my mom and sister. And there used to be a swing set over here that we would have available to us. And that was my bedroom window right there on the top. And I remember looking across the way to our neighbors here from my window, and one of the kids who lived here would be able to look at me from their window, and we would talk to each other. And there was an old man who would sit out on the stoop or the porch there all the time. And a lot of the kids in the neighborhood were afraid of him. I don't think he ever did anything or gave us any reason to be afraid of him, but he just looked old and scary to us, so that was enough. This is Worthington Street. I'm going to head up that way, but I wanted to take a look over here, because one of my good friends, probably my first good friend in the neighborhood, lived right over here. His name was Sean. And I also knew someone who lived in this house. I would go in there sometimes. So Sean lived right over here. And that one. And one of my earliest memories is going to his house because they had raccoons. They had a cage outside with some raccoons in it. And I would go to check out the raccoons. I'm not sure why they had raccoons. I think he lived in 593. Or maybe it was one of these. It might have been one of these, actually. This is where First Avenue begins. As you can see, it's a bit hard scrabble looking around here. There's like no sidewalks, just gravel driveways. This is sort of on the edges of the built-up part of this part of town, beside the ONTC Strange location for a basketball net. All right, let's walk along Worthington Street here for a bit. I also had some friends who lived over here. Still no sidewalks. I guess back then as a kid we didn't really care so much if there were sidewalks or not. We just ride our bikes all over the place without a care in the world. And we'd walk wherever we wanted. It was a different era. And we'd get into those misadventures I mentioned, which I wonder if kids these days do the same thing. Maybe they do. Seems like the things we did and got away with would probably get kids put in juvie these days. I don't know. Nothing too bad, of course. So it's pretty quiet around here right now. I wonder if there's any kids even left in the neighborhood. I have a feeling it's mostly just older people, empty nesters and that sort of thing. Senior citizens who've probably lived here since the 70s, when they first came here as young adults with a family. I remember walking up this way. There were like woods and rocks and things you could explore. So that's where we came off of the overpass over there. So we'll go down to John Street. Eventually some sidewalks appear here. I think just a bit further ahead. Got some of these larger houses here, but I think these ones are divided up into apartments, as I mentioned. Actually, I think I used to go into that house. I knew some people who lived there much later as a young adult. I think I remember going to a few parties in that house there. And this is going towards downtown. You can see City Hall up ahead and a couple other apartment buildings. I think over the years, a number of houses in the neighborhood have burned down and were never rebuilt again, leaving some vacant lots. So here we have some sidewalks appearing. Metcalf Street. Definitely has a bit of a desolate feel. I think we're walking over Chippewa Creek here. This creek winds its way through much of North Bay. Chippewa Creek shares a name with my former high school, Chippewa Secondary School, which was on Chippewa Street. Well, these houses are definitely a bit run down, but looks like some work is being done to get some of them in better condition. Things start to improve once you cross John Street here, going further along Worthington. The housing stock gets a bit more attractive. So here's John Street. I'm gonna cross, but then we'll check out my other place where I used to live, which I have shown before, but we're so close by. I just wanted to check out this building over here. I think this is a transformer station, sort of disguised to look like an old building. It is an old building, I guess, but there's nothing in it other than transformers. I always liked this. I always thought this would be an awesome actual apartment building or something. All right, let's go back over to John Street. We'll look at my last North Bay apartment. And then I'll continue along McIntyre Street further towards downtown. I think that stretch of McIntyre is in pretty rough shape these days. It was always in rough shape, but I think it's even worse shape now than it was back then. So that's actually my old building right over there. That house with the fire escape going up, the wooden fire escape, and the very top led to my kitchen window. So you could open that window and step out onto the fire escape. That's the back side, obviously. I used to be able to crawl onto the roof actually and stand on the very top of the building. George from Appliance is still here. These are my landlords. So I would just walk right here and step inside and pay my rent at the service desk of the appliance store. And this is where I lived from 1996 until 2010. So a good stretch of 14 years. And my unit was that very top one there in the attic. was my little living room window there. So I had these slanty roofs. Kind of was a neat looking space actually. And my very first ever YouTube video was recorded from inside there on my other channel, which is called Ken Continues, which was my original YouTube channel, where I did a little apartment tour there and introduced my cat George. This used to be a British pub called the Bull and Quench, but now it's a different restaurant. I used to go there all the time, being as it was so conveniently located. And I bought my first ever computer in a computer shop that was located on the ground floor of this building on the side. And just up there a little ways is where we began the video. A bit further east along McIntyre. And this was a corner store called Danny's. So a quick hop, skip, and a jump from where I lived. And there was another store right over here at Main and John. It was a larger chain convenience store. This was just a locally operated store here. Danny's the Luckiest Store, it was called. Although the guy who ran it when I went there was named Joe. Maybe he took it over from Danny and just kept the name. All right, now let's check out the rest of this stretch of McIntyre Street. They have a little library here. This is pretty much considered the roughest sort of couple of blocks in the downtown area, or it used to be. There are a few other areas that could compete for that title, I guess. And when I lived up there back in the day, I did see some pretty weird things sometimes. Sometimes just looking out my window, I could watch some sort of shenanigans taking place. Looks like City Laundry is long gone. The building is in rough shape now. That was still operating when I left the area. Let's cross to the other side.
So, getting all views and tracking. I'm sure I haven't played too much music.
There are some other parts of town far from downtown that are considered a bit rough also. There are more suburban, low rental housing developments that were built, say, in the boom of the 1960s and 70s when suburban development was starting to take off in North Bay. And some of those areas over the years got a bit run down. They consist of townhouse style developments. not like an old urban inner city look like this. North Bay Transit. Not that North Bay had a real crime problem, not when I was growing up here anyway. It was a very safe city with overall low crime rates. But if stuff was to go down, it would often go down in a few certain areas, which were quite predictable, such as this area here. Nothing too major though. Homicides were a rarity in North Bay, and they still are, as far as I know. Just things like assault, theft, the occasional robberies. And the old Sands Hotel used to stand on that corner. It fell into disrepair over the years and eventually became kind of like a slum. And eventually it was purchased and demolished just recently, within the last couple of years, I think. And this is Fisher Street. I see that this property is sold here. I wonder if there's any plans to build anything on site. It's a perfect location for an apartment building. I think North Bay needs apartment buildings, some affordable rentals. See a lot of these sort of vacant lots in the area that often stay that way for decades. There's just little incentive for people to build on some of these vacant lots. This used to be a dairy facility here. You could get milk products. And that's City Hall right up ahead. Lee's China Garden. Yeah. Yeah. Well, maybe I'll take us over to City Hall here and I'll start to wrap things up. Looks like they filled in the pool. There was a reflecting pool here. I guess they figured they had no need for such a thing. That's the North Bay Public Library just on the other side. That's the back entrance. It fronts onto Worthington Street. Oh well, there was a neat little pool here, but nothing stays the same. And there's City Hall from the back side also. The main entrance is on Wild Street. But I hope you enjoyed a little tour of my old neighborhood, including my very first ever place of residence in North Bay and my last ever place of residence in North Bay. So that kind of worked out. And also the rough part of town, if you can believe that or not. So leave a comment down below. Let me know your thoughts. And be sure to like, share, and subscribe if you haven't already done so. And also make sure you hit that notification bell so that you don't miss any of my videos. If you'd like to support the channel, there are links in the description where you can do so via PayPal, as well as via my merch store. Or you can also support the channel by becoming a channel member, or by sending a super thanks if you prefer. And you can find me on Instagram also under KContinuum. So thanks for watching, and thanks to all the channel members. And be sure to keep checking back, because, as always, I will continue.